Hello, I am Jesus Zamora Bonilla from UNED, the Spanish National Open University. And this is my presentation for the Social Ontology and Collective Intentionality Conference towards an ontology of social problems. The notion of social problem is perhaps the most important notion in the social sciences and in social policy that one may find lacking in the literature on social ontology. The goal of this presentation is mainly to offer some ideas about how to approach the notion of social problem from the point of view of social ontology. I do not intend to propose a particular approach to this problem, but just to invite some reflection on the part of the people working on social ontology to consider the notion of social problem as a kind of fundamental notion. In this first part of my talk, I will simply present a brief set of ideas about the notion of social problem from an ontological point of view. Basically, it is a discussion about what are social problems, what are the essence of, or the definition of social problems, so to say. Of course, social problems are almost everywhere in the social sciences. There are even textbooks or handbooks or encyclopedias devoted to social problems, like this one you have here. By the way, it's surprising that this encyclopedia, which is fairly recent, has more than 600 entries on different kinds of social problems that are categorized according to this index, but there is no entry devoted to the definition of what a social problem is. It is probably something that everybody assumes that it's so easy to understand that nobody needs a definition. Well, this is just a capture of the index of the encyclopedia, and you can see the big variety of problems, of kinds of things that are included in the field of social problem, from cultural relativism to extramarital sex, to nuclear family, to things about education, etc., etc. This is another textbook, or very recent textbook on social problems, and this is the classification they offer. But, well, this is looking for definitions of social problem. I saw that 1 century ago, people not even talked about social problems in plural, but in singular. They talked about the social problem. That was the problem of how to avoid the disintegration of society. Well, it was a time of crisis, and it looked like as if society were going to collapse or something like that. And of course, nothing similar to what are we now seeing in the world. I'm ironic. Well, the question is how to define the notion of social problem. We have seen that even in the main textbooks on the problem, on this question, the notion itself of social problem is considered so trivial that there is no need to have a definition. But however, you can find in the literature lots of attempts to define the notion. This is perhaps the one that appears in one of the most recent works on the problem, and as you see, it's a definition that is not very helpful nor apparently very deep, because well, it simply means that the social problem has something that has negative consequences for many people, and that we have to do something about it. Well, this does not look very illuminating. Perhaps this definition is much illuminating, and it's not a new definition, by the way. You see, it comes from a paper that is almost 1 century old, from 1923. If we analyze the ideas included in this definition, we see several interesting steps. For example, one, that the social problem is a problem. Well, this is not bad. And this is not trivial. In my next slide, I will consider why this is not trivial at all, the notion of problem in general, from the point of view of the social sciences. The second point is something that affects many people, as I saw in the previous definition, but which is more interesting, affects many people in a common way, in the sense that it is not a problem for individuals in an isolated way, so to say, but either the solution to the problem, and these are points 5 and 7, either the solution to the problem is one solution in the sense that it is public, in the sense of public goods, is the same for everyone, or at least requires some kind of coordinated or organized action from part of the people involved. Why did I say that the notion of problem is not the general notion of problem, not a social problem? It's not easy from the point of view, it's far from trivial from the point of view of standard social sciences. Well, in particular, we might say that this notion of problem is difficult to represent within the analytical framework, within the conceptual framework of the most important paradigm in the social sciences, rational choice theories, so to say. After all, choices are choices, and you can represent, in the case of an individual, the choices it has. You can represent the possible consequences of each choice, the utilities, or the order of preferences of the outcomes of these choices. But it's difficult, at least I have not managed to think too much deep about how to define a choice that is problematic as different from another choice that is not as problematic as that. I mean, rational choice theory has not the analytical tools to determine when a choice is more problematic than another choice. Perhaps in the case of not a single individual, but of interacting individuals, in the case of games, this is more easier because we might define a problem as a situation in which there are maybe inefficient outcomes, like, for example, in prisoner's dilemmas or in coordination games or in Schelling checkboard model. These are games that in a more or less natural way lead to situations that are not the ones that the people participating in the game would have preferred. But this is perhaps a definition of problem that is too constrained to problems that affect the coordination of several people, so it's not possible to apply it to the notion of a problem that only affects one person. And I am not sure that all social problems are due to problems of inefficiency or coordination or the kind of games that I have put as example. I think that what basically lacks in the standard ontology of social theories to capture the notion of problem is that a problem is not simply something that that leads you to bad consequences, but it's something that you have to do something about. And basically, you see here in the last part of the presentation, one problem might be a problem in the sense of that we have to think how to do about it, or sorry, what to do about it. And it can be a problem in the sense that even if we know what to do about it, it must be difficult to proceed about how to do what we know that we must do. And these different things can be difficult in different senses. In the sense of a problem in the sense of that we have to think about what to do is difficult in the sense, so to say, of cognitive difficulty. It's a problem in the sense of a problem of mathematics, for example. We have to think about the possible solutions. The problem with rational choice theory is that the options, the choices, have to be given in order to define the choice tree or the game. But in many cases, social problems are problems because, to begin with, we don't know what to do. We don't know what are the choices, the alternative courses of action that we have, we might choose. So problems are problems in the sense that we don't know what to do about them. And also they can be problems in the sense that we don't know how to do what we know that we have to do. And this has more to do with coordination, etc., cooperation, and so on. So I think that something is missing in standard social choice paradigms, but perhaps in other, not so based on rational choice theory like functionalism or Marxism. Perhaps it is easier to define the notion of problem, but well, I think that it is something that it's interesting to think a little bit about. Perhaps the idea of intentionality, not in the bare sense of rational choice theory, but in Bradman's sense of intentions as plans, it would be easier to define what a problem is, because a problem, we might define it as something that interferes our plans or something like that. Lastly, to end this first part of the presentation, these are some of the reasons why I think that social problems are relevant for people working on social ontology. First, because social problems are perhaps the piece of social stuff where facts and values, opinions and actions are more intimately intermingled or mixed, so to say. And besides that, social problems are probably the portion of social stuff that is most real for real people. Problems like racism, unemployment, etc., etc. If we think of reality in a rather, so to say, existentialist or Heideggerian sense. On the other hand, social problems are perhaps also the piece of social stuff where social construction is easier to discern, in the sense that, of course, it's not as clear why some social institutions or some social groups, particularly big groups like social classes or something like that, how these social entities are constructed. But social problems are obviously constructed in the sense that their existence, their identity, their conceptualization depends a lot on what people think and say and debate about them. And lastly, social problems are an interesting concept for social ontology, because, as I told, they are difficult to articulate into existing social science paradigms, not only social ontology paradigms, but also social science paradigms. So it is at least a challenge for social ontologists to try to introduce, to fit the notion of social problems into their social ontology, into their preferred social ontology. The question is, well, if social problems are so important, not only in social sciences, but in social life, why is it that if you look at the literature on social ontology, it's so difficult to find anything about social problems? Well, my guess is that one intuitively tend to think of social problems as something that are not very fundamental at the ontological level, in the sense that there are some things, some fundamental things in the social ontology, in the social stuff, that are the groups, institutions, practices, processes, etc., etc. And problems are a kind of emergent property that arises at a very superficial or high level as compared to this stuff that is at the ground of social ontology. Perhaps this is the main reason why social problems are not so common studied in this literature. Well, the second part of my presentation is a little bit more ambitious, and it tries to offer some ideas about how to not only to study social problems from an ontological point of view, but even to rethink social ontology from the point of view of social problems, to do something like a social problem-based social ontology. Well, this we can dispense of, but basically the idea is that the rest of the entities that constitute the social ontology emerge out of social problems, and not only social problems out of it. The idea is kind of dynamic or even dialectical approach to social ontology, in the sense that, well, the social stuff evolves in time, and at a given moment of time, there are some social institutions, groups, processes, norms, practices, etc. But this leads or finds some problems at some point, and this forces to modify the social ontology of the society. And so the new entities that compose the ontology of a society arise out of the problems or out of the way that the society has tried to solve these problems. So most social entities are easier to be understood if we think about them as not only as attempts to solve social problems, but as entities that have arisen out of our attempts to solve social problems. Well, this may be connected to a lot of approaches, of course, in social ontology studies, and also in other, it can be connected to lots of other analytical tools in contemporary philosophy. But this is something that, as I said, I invite people to think about this in the future. Lastly, I will mention a few consequences of this problem-based approach to social ontology. Well, as I have said, the idea is not to think social problems or social entities as arising out of social problems, but as to be understood as consequences of our attempts to solve social problems. So it's not a functionalist view of social institutions, for example. It's not that social institutions arise as solutions of social problems. It is that social institutions arise as attempts or as the consequence of our conflicting attempts and perhaps failed attempts of solving social problems. On the other hand, the idea of normativity, that is very fundamental to most approaches to social ontology, is perhaps better understood if we understand the normativity, the foundation of the normativity, of the normative matters related to a social stuff, as normativity that has to do with the solutions that are attempted to social problems, or the attribution of responsibility that we manage in order to solve social problems. In the third place, we have also, we can say that the social ontology based on the idea of social problems may be interesting in the sense that it allows to do something like a reverse engineering of social institutions, because we look at institutions as attempted solutions to solve social problems, and so we can identify the moves that have led to those social institutions. Well, I mentioned that there are some problems, or the problematicity of problems, of social problems, may be due in part to factors that are real, in the sense that have to do with natural or even social or economic resources, or they can be symbolic in the sense that they are more derived from values or from our plans, etc., etc. And so some social problems that are more closer to the real end of this continuum from real to symbolic could be these natural disasters, for example, the current pandemic, for example. Some problems in which the symbolic and the real are more closely mixed are unemployment, racism, for example. And some problems that are more symbolic or in which the symbolic part are more important is like, for example, separatist movements in wealthy, small portions of the developed world, or like the image in the bottom, this is the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century that debated about whether Jesus Christ was homoousios or homoiousios, which means of the same substance as the Father, or simply as from a similar substance to that of the Father. So St. Nicholas was one of the protagonists of the Council of Nicaea, as you probably know. And lastly, this is the last slide. This difference between homoousios and homoiousios is not as naive as it might be, because perhaps the deepest ontological question about social problems is the identification of social problems, the criteria that we use in order to distinguish what is a problem, and of two cases that we find in the social world, whether they are simply two different problems but similar, or they are cases of the same problem, and it's same, they are homoousios, they have the same essence, or they are homoiousios, sorry, which are of similar, they are just similar problems. And this has to do with the debates that we might perform about the attribution of responsibility, the identification of victims, the relationship between some victims of some problems of other problems, and in particular, our ideas about what are the actions and who are the responsible of the actions that have to be made in order to try to solve these problems. Well, this is just, this is all, and just to finish, this is not a theory about social problems from an ontological point of view, but just an invitation to consider social problems as a relevant concept to be investigated into social ontology. So thank you very much to all.